Have you ever heard of a place that doesn't exist? A prison so secret it's not on any map? A fortress where history's most inconvenient people simply vanish. Welcome to Rocca Nera, the Black Fortress. Tonight, we begin a journey into the dark heart of ancient Rome, a story whispered in shadows and buried for centuries. Forget the Colosseum, forget the Senate. We're going to a place far more terrifying, a place built to erase memories. In the jagged, mist-shrouded mountains, miles from the marble halls of Rome, stood a fortress carved from the mountain itself. Its walls were the color of storm clouds, its gates forged from iron and despair. This was Rocca Nera, the emperor's forgotten prison. It wasn't a place for common criminals. Thieves and rebels went to the city dungeons. No, Rocca Nera was for a different kind of prisoner, the kind that knew too much, a disgraced general who saw something he shouldn't have, a senator who voted the wrong way, a lover who fell out of favor. These weren't just prisoners. They were inconvenient truths. The journey to Rocca Nera was a one-way trip. Prisoners were hooded and chained, transported in unmarked black carriages that thundered through remote villages in the dead of night. Locals would shutter their windows and whisper prayers, knowing the black carriage carried another soul to be forgotten. The guards who drove these carriages were a special breed. Men sworn to an oath of absolute silence, their faces hidden behind grim iron masks. They were called the Silent Wardens. It was said that after their first trip, they never spoke another word. The horrors they witnessed sealed their lips forever. Our story begins not with an emperor or a general, but with a young man named Lucius. He wasn't a soldier or a politician. He was a stonemason, one of the best in Rome, known for his ability to read the secrets hidden in rock. One day, a Praetorian guard, his face a mask of cold duty, appeared at his workshop. No explanation was given. He was simply told the emperor required his skills for a special project. A project of utmost secrecy. Lucius, with his tools in hand and a knot of fear in his stomach, was placed in a black carriage. The hood was pulled over his head, and the world went dark. For days, the carriage jolted along rough, winding roads. Lucius lost all track of time. Was it day? Was it night? The only sounds were the creaking of the wheels, the grunt of the horses, and the rhythmic, unnerving silence of his masked escorts. When the carriage finally stopped, the air was different. 'Twas thin, cold, and smelled of pine and damp stone. The hood was pulled from his head. Before him, Lucius saw a nightmare etched in granite. Rocca Nera. It wasn't just a fortress. 'Twas a scar on the face of the mountain, a jagged maw that seemed to swallow the very light. Towers clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers, and the single, massive gate looked less like an entrance and more like the sealed lid of a tomb. The stones themselves seemed to weep with a cold, perpetual dampness. Lucius, the stonemason, could feel the misery embedded in every block. This place was built not just with stone and mortar, but with fear and sorrow. He was led through the gate, the sound of it closing behind him a deafening boom that echoed through the valley, a sound of absolute finality. Inside, the fortress was a labyrinth of dark corridors and steep, winding staircases. The air was thick with the smell of mold, cold iron, and something else. A faint metallic scent that made the back of his throat tighten. There were no other prisoners visible, yet he felt 1,000 unseen eyes watching him from the shadows of countless cells. The silence was heavier here, a suffocating blanket that pressed in from all sides. He was taken to the heart of the fortress, to a chamber deep within the mountain. There, a man waited for him. He was not a guard. He wore the robes of an administrator, but his eyes held the cold emptiness of a man who had seen too much and felt too little. This was Cassian, the governor of Rocca Nera. He didn't offer a greeting. He simply unrolled a blueprint onto a stone table. The blueprint was unlike anything Lucius had ever seen. It depicted a new cell, a special cell, to be built deep below the existing dungeons. It was an engineering monstrosity. The design was intricate, filled with complex mechanisms, hidden locks, and walls so thick no sound could ever escape. It was a prison within a prison, a tomb for the living. "You will build this," Cassian said, his voice as dry as dust. "To the exact specifications. You will not ask questions. You will not speak to anyone but me. When you are finished, your service to the Emperor will be complete." Lucius looked at the plans, a chill running down his spine. This wasn't just a cell. This was a place designed to drive a person insane. A place to be utterly alone, to be forgotten not just by the world, but by God himself. He knew then why he was there. He was building a cage for someone the Emperor didn't just want imprisoned, but utterly erased. As the days turned into weeks, Lucius worked in the deep, echoing darkness, the sound of his hammer and chisel the only break in the oppressive silence. He was given food and water, but no conversation. The silent wardens would appear and disappear like ghosts, their masked faces revealing nothing. He started to feel the fortress working on him, the isolation gnawing at the edges of his sanity. He began talking to himself, just to hear a human voice. He would trace patterns on the stones, imagining faces, anything to fight off the encroaching void. One night, while carving a particularly dense section of granite, his chisel struck something that wasn't rock. It was a small, hollow space. Curious, he carefully chipped away the stone around it. Inside, he found a small, leather-bound diary tucked away decades ago by another unfortunate soul. His heart pounded in his chest. A voice from the past, proof that someone else had been here. With trembling hands, he opened it. The ink was faded, the script elegant but hurried. It was the journal of a senator, a man named Decimus, who had been brought to Rocca Nera a generation before. Decimus wrote of the emperor's paranoia, of a secret society within the Senate, and of a truth so dangerous it had to be buried. He wrote of his despair, his loneliness, and his slow descent into madness within these same walls. But then, the diary revealed something more, a secret. Decimus, a brilliant architect before he became a senator, had discovered a flaw in Rocca Nera's design. A hidden network of forgotten service tunnels, sealed off during the fortress's construction. He had spent years secretly mapping them, hoping to find a way out. The last entry was a hastily scrawled map, a faint line leading from his cell block to what he believed was an opening on the far side of the mountain. The final words were, "Tonight, I walk towards freedom or the abyss. May fortune favor the bold." Lucius's world tilted. Hope, a dangerous and almost forgotten feeling, bloomed in his chest. Was it possible? Could there be a way out of this living tomb? He now possessed the most dangerous secret in Rocca Nera, not just the blueprint for its newest, most terrible cell, but also the map to its potential undoing. His work took on a new urgency. By day, he was the emperor's stonemason, building a cage of ultimate despair. But by night, he was a student of the dead senator's legacy, memorizing the map, studying the fortress's layout, and listening to the whispers of the stone. He started noticing things he hadn't before: a draft where there should be none, a hollow sound in a wall, a different pattern of moss suggesting a hidden fissure. The fortress was no longer just his prison. It was a puzzle, and he held the key. But Cassian was always watching. The governor's cold eyes seemed to follow him everywhere. Lucius knew that one wrong move, one moment of suspicion, and the cell he was building would become his own. He was trapped in a deadly game of cat and mouse, where the prize was his life and the cost of failure was to be erased from history. Another ghost haunting the halls of the Black Fortress. What truth was so dangerous it required a place like Rocca Nera? Who was the mysterious prisoner this new cell was being built for? And could Lucius use a dead man's secret to escape the emperor's forgotten prison before it consumed him completely? The story has just begun. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because in Part 2, Lucius will risk everything to find the hidden tunnel. And we'll discover the shocking identity of Rocca Nera's next intended resident. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching. Have you ever heard of Rocca Nera? It's a name that doesn't appear on most maps, a place whispered about in the darkest corners of Roman history. It translates to Black Rock, and for centuries it was the empire's most feared prison, a fortress carved into a desolate mountain where hope went to die. Its story is intertwined with the fall of a great mind, a scholar named Marcus Valerius. Before his name became a cautionary tale, Marcus Valerius was one of Rome's most respected intellectuals. His home was a haven of knowledge, its walls lined with scrolls of philosophy, history, and science. Students and senators alike would gather in his atrium, eager to hear his insights on everything from the Stoic teachings of Zeno to the latest engineering marvels of the aqueducts. He wasn't just a teacher. He was a beacon of reason in a city often swayed by passion and politics. Marcus believed that the strength of Rome wasn't just in its legions or its laws, but in its commitment to truth and open debate. He championed the idea that every citizen had a duty to think critically, to question, and to hold their leaders accountable. It was a principle he lived by, and one that would ultimately seal his fate. The political climate in Rome was shifting. The emperor, once seen as a figure of stability, was growing more autocratic. His decrees became more absolute, his tolerance for dissent shrinking with each passing day. New taxes were levied without the Senate's full approval, and critics who once spoke freely now lowered their voices. Fearing the ever-watchful eyes of the Praetorian Guard, the vibrant intellectual circles of Rome began to thin as fear put a chill on open discourse. This was the Rome in which Marcus Valerius decided he could not remain silent. He saw the foundation of the Republic, the very principles he held dear, eroding under the weight of tyranny. He began to write, not in fiery public speeches, but in carefully worded essays and pamphlets, circulated discreetly among his trusted colleagues. His writings were not calls for rebellion, but pleas for reason. He used historical precedent and logical arguments to question the emperor's recent decrees, highlighting the dangers of unchecked power. He called it disloyal writing, but to Marcus, it was a loyal citizen's duty. He knew the risks. His friends warned him, begging him to burn his papers and retreat into the safety of academic obscurity. But Marcus believed that a life lived in fear was no life at all. He argued that if men of principle stayed silent, then the very soul of Rome would be lost. His most famous hidden essay, The Emperor's New Laws, was a masterclass in subtle defiance. It never named the emperor directly, but its critique of a nameless, power-hungry ruler was unmistakable. The inevitable finally happened. One moonless night, the heavy thud of sandals echoed in the quiet street outside Marcus's villa. The doors splintered open, and grim-faced legionaries stormed in. They didn't bother with pleasantries. They overturned tables, tore scrolls from their shelves, and found the half-finished manuscript on his writing desk. The charge was read aloud in the flickering torchlight. Conspiracy against the emperor through disloyal writings. There was no public trial. No chance for Marcus to defend his ideas in a court of law. The justice he so deeply believed in was denied to him. His arrest was swift, brutal, and silent. Neighbors peered through shuttered windows, watching as the once-rived scholar was dragged from his home, his hands bound in coarse rope. He didn't shout or struggle. His face, illuminated for a moment by a soldier's lantern, was a mask of calm resignation. It was the face of a man who had long ago accepted his destiny. He was paraded through the back alleys of Rome, not the Grand Forum. This was not a public spectacle. It was a quiet, chilling message to anyone else who dared to think freely. The witnesses were the shadows themselves. Whispers followed the small procession. That's Valerius, one might say. They say he questioned the emperor. The story of his arrest spread not like wildfire, but like a creeping frost, freezing the courage in people's hearts. From the edge of the city, his journey truly began. He was transferred from the city guard to a unit of grim-faced soldiers, specialists in transporting high-value prisoners. His destination was no ordinary jail. He was headed toward Rocca Nera. The journey was arduous, a long march northward into the rugged Apennine Mountains. The path grew steeper, the air colder. The civilized roads of the empire gave way to treacherous mountain trails. Bound in heavy iron chains that chafed his wrists and ankles raw, Marcus was forced to march alongside hardened criminals and captured foreign warriors. He, a man of words and thoughts, was now treated like the most dangerous of brutes. He saw men collapse from exhaustion, only to be whipped back to their feet. He witnessed the casual cruelty of the guards and the profound despair in the eyes of his fellow prisoners. Yet, even in these dire circumstances, the scholar within him did not die. He observed, he listened to the soldiers' dialects, noting the regional variations. He studied the rock formations of the mountains, pondering the geological forces that shaped them. At night, huddled for warmth against the cold stone, he would gaze at the stars, charting the constellations in his mind, finding a small piece of eternal order in a world of chaos. He was no longer a teacher with students, but he remained a student of the world. After weeks of travel, they finally saw it. Rocca Nera. It was less a fortress and more a scar on the face of the mountain. A single monolithic tower of black stone jutted into the sky, accessible only by a narrow, winding path cut into the cliffside. A perpetual mist seemed to cling to its base, and vultures circled high above. It was a place built not just to contain bodies, but to crush spirits. As Marcus Valerius was dragged in chains through its massive iron gates, the sound echoed like the closing of a tomb. The world he knew, books, debate, and the pursuit of truth was gone. He had vanished from Rome, his name officially erased from public records. To the empire, he was a non-person. But in the hushed conversations of those who remembered him, he became a legend. A symbol of intellectual courage, a man who dared to speak truth to power and paid the ultimate price. His physical journey had ended, but the story of the scholar's fall was just beginning. And inside the dark walls of Rocca Nera, a new, brutal chapter of his life was about to unfold. We'll explore what happened to him inside that terrible prison in our next video. Thank you for watching, and if you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing for more tales from the shadows of history. The island of Albatross rose from the sea like a jagged tooth, its dark cliffs promising only despair. When the iron gates of the prison clanged shut behind Marcus, he knew he had entered a world stripped of light. This was no ordinary penitentiary. This was a place where hope came to die. The air hung thick and heavy, smelling of damp stone, salt, and something else, fear. The other prisoners moved like ghosts, their eyes hollow, their voices reduced to hushed whispers that skittered along the cold corridors. They spoke of things that made the skin crawl. Strange experiments conducted in the dead of night, the sounds of which echoed from the infirmary wing. They whispered of interrogations that weren't just about breaking a man's will, but about unraveling his very mind. And then there were the disappearances. Inmates who were there at evening count, gone by morning, their bunks stripped clean as if they had never existed. At the heart of this web of dread was the warden, Lucius Corvinus. He was a man who carried himself with an almost theatrical grace, his smile a thin, predatory line. He spoke of order, discipline, and rehabilitation, but his words were a flimsy veil over a core of pure cruelty. Corvinus ruled Albatross not with laws, but with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. He believed in breaking spirits, not just bodies. He saw the prison as his personal laboratory, and the inmates as little more than subjects for his twisted theories on human endurance. Marcus quickly learned that the true danger here wasn't the other convicts. It was the chilling, calculated malevolence of the man in charge. The prison itself was a character in this grim play. It was a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. Cell Block C, where Marcus was housed, was known as the echo chamber because the whispers never seemed to die. Every creak of the floorboards, every drip of water in the cistern, every distant, mournful cry of a seabird seemed to carry a warning. The guards were extensions of Corvinus's will, silent, watchful, and unforgiving. They moved with a chilling efficiency, their faces impassive masks that betrayed no emotion. They enforced the warden's order with brutal precision, ensuring that the prison of silence remained just that. To speak out, to ask questions, was to draw the warden's gaze, and no one wanted that. Marcus tried to piece together the fragments of information he gathered from the hushed conversations. He learned of a prisoner named Elias, a former journalist who had been digging into Corvinus's past before he was framed and sent to Albatross. Elias had vanished 3 weeks before Marcus's arrival. The inmates believed he had discovered something terrible, something the warden would kill to keep hidden. They pointed to a locked door at the end of the western wing, a door that even the guards seemed to avoid. They called it the quiet room. No one who went in ever came out the same, if they came out at all. The whispers said that was where Corvinus conducted his most personal interrogations. One evening, during the monotonous meal of thin gruel and stale bread, an old prisoner named Silas sidled up to Marcus. His face was a roadmap of a hard life, his eyes surprisingly sharp. "You're different," Silas rasped, barely moving his lips. "You're looking for answers, not just survival. That's dangerous here." Marcus didn't respond, but his gaze met Silas's. The old man continued, "Corvinus doesn't just run a prison. He's searching for something. Something he thinks is hidden within these walls, or within one of us." He nodded towards the infirmary. "The experiments, they're not random. He's testing us, looking for a specific trait, a specific weakness, or strength." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. The sounds of the prison seemed amplified. The distant clang of a metal door, a sudden shout followed by an abrupt silence, the soft scuttling of rats in the walls. He thought about Silas's words. What was Corvinus looking for? And how did it connect to the disappearances and the quiet room? He realized that Albatross wasn't just a place of containment. It was a hunting ground. The warden was the predator, and the prisoners were his prey. But this predator wasn't just hunting for sport. He was hunting for a specific prize. The next day, Marcus began his own quiet investigation. He observed the guards' routines, the patterns of the warden's patrols, the subtle hierarchy among the inmates. He needed allies, but trust was a currency scarcer than food in Albatross. He decided to start with Silas. During work duty in the laundry, surrounded by the steam and the rhythmic scrubbing of clothes, Marcus approached the old man again. "Elias," Marcus said, his voice low. "What did he find?" Silas's hands stilled. He looked around nervously before speaking. "He found records, old prison schematics. This island, ... It was something else before it was a prison. A military outpost. A research facility. Elias believed Corvinus wasn't assigned here by chance. He chose this place." Silas explained that Elias had found a hidden compartment in the library behind a loose stone in the fireplace. He'd hidden his notes there before he was taken. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead Marcus had. Getting into the library alone would be a challenge. It was a privilege reserved for a select few inmates, and always under a guard's watchful eye. Marcus knew he would have to create a diversion. A big one. Something that would draw every guard away, even for just a few minutes. The risk was immense. If he was caught, he wouldn't just face solitary confinement. He would face the warden. He would face the quiet room. But the thought of the men who had disappeared, the thought of Elias's unseen fate, fueled his resolve. He wasn't just fighting for his own freedom anymore. He was fighting for the truth, fighting against the silent terror that gripped Albatross. He formulated a plan, a risky gambit that would involve inciting a carefully controlled riot in the mess hall. He enlisted the help of a few other prisoners who were desperate for any change, any spark of rebellion. He explained the plan in hushed tones, using the prison's own code of whispers. It was a gamble on the shared desperation that permeated the cold stone walls. The moment came during evening meal. A prearranged signal dropped metal tray unleashed chaos. Shouts erupted. Tables were overturned. The guards, caught off guard, rushed to contain the pandemonium. In the confusion, Marcus slipped away, his heart pounding against his ribs. He moved through the now chaotic corridors like a shadow, his every sense on high alert. He reached the library, the door mercifully unlocked amidst the turmoil. The room was empty, eerily silent compared to the riot outside. He found the fireplace, his fingers tracing the stones, searching for the loose one Silas had described. He found it. With a grunt of effort, he pulled it free. Behind it, in a small, dark cavity, was a leather-bound journal. Elias's journal. He quickly flipped through the pages. They were filled with frantic handwriting, diagrams, and clippings. Elias had not only found the old schematics, but had also cross-referenced them with military records he had somehow smuggled in. The truth was far worse than Marcus had imagined. Albatross wasn't just a former research facility. It was built on top of something ancient, a subterranean structure that predated the military base. And Corvinus knew about it. The experiments, the interrogations, they were all designed to find a way to access it. Corvinus wasn't just a cruel warden. He was a man obsessed, hunting for a power he believed was buried beneath their feet. Just as Marcus was about to hide the journal and flee, he heard a sound that froze his blood. The slow, deliberate click of a key turning in the library's lock. The chaos outside had subsided. He was trapped. The door creaked open, and standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim hall light, was Warden Corvinus, a thin, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Looking for something, Marcus?" he asked, his voice as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. The prison of silence had finally found its voice, and it belonged to the warden. In the deepest, darkest bowels of the Black Citadel, where the very air tasted of despair and forgotten histories, Marcus was thrown into his final destination. This wasn't just a cell. It was a tomb. The stones wept with a dampness that seeped into his bones, and the only light was a single, defiant sliver that fought its way through a crack high above. For days, he paced the small space, his hope dwindling with each passing hour. The guards were brutes, their taunts echoing the finality of his sentence. His quest, his promise to his village. It was all ending here, in the suffocating silence. But he wasn't entirely alone. From the adjacent cell, separated by a wall of solid, unyielding stone, he began to hear a voice. It wasn't a cry for help or a madman's rambling. It was a soft, measured whisper, a story being told to the darkness itself. The voice spoke of ancient kings and fallen empires, of celestial alignments, and the hidden arteries of magic that ran beneath the world. It was a voice of profound knowledge, a voice that had seen the rise and fall of ages. Intrigued, Marcus pressed his ear against the cold stone, listening. One evening, as the guards' footsteps receded after their meager meal delivery, Marcus dared to speak. "Who's there?" he whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. A moment of silence passed, a silence so heavy he thought he'd imagined the voice all along. Then it replied, clear and steady. "They call me Selene. And you are Marcus of the Northern Plains, aren't you?" The boy who carries the Starfire Shard. Marcus froze. How could she know? The shard was his most guarded secret, a fragment of a fallen star he'd found as a child, the very reason the tyrannical Lord Malachor wanted him dead. "How do you know that?" he asked, his heart pounding against his ribs. A soft, dry chuckle echoed from the other side of the wall. "This fortress has many secrets, Marcus, and I have had a very long time to learn them. I was the royal scribe once. My crime was not treason, but knowledge. I learned things the king and his sorcerers wished to remain buried. Over the next few days, their whispers became a lifeline. Selene was a living library of forbidden lore. She knew the Citadel not as a prison, but as a complex machine, a puzzle of stone and steel. She told him of the guard rotations, not just the times, but the men themselves. She knew which guard was a gambler, easily distracted by a game of chance. She knew which one had a sick child at home, his mind often wandering. She knew about Sergeant Boren, the commander of the Dungeon Watch, and his secret weakness for a rare vintage of wine, a bottle of which was locked away in the warden's private stores, just one level above. She described the layout of the entire fortress, from the rat-infested sewer grates to the hidden postern gate on the western wall, a gate that hadn't been used in a century. "There is a way out," she whispered one night, her voice filled with a new intensity. "But the path is a razor's edge. The timing must be perfect, precise to the second. One misstep and we won't just be caught. We'll be executed on the spot." Marcus felt a surge of hope, the first he'd felt in weeks. "What do we need to do?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. Selene explained the plan. 'Twas audacious, bordering on impossible. It relied on a specific celestial event, the night of the twin moons. "Once every decade," she explained, "the two moons of our world align perfectly. For 17 minutes, their combined gravitational pull affects the ancient locking mechanisms of the lower cells. The iron tumblers, forged with old magic, become momentarily loose. A precise, sharp strike at the right moment can shatter the lock." It was a long shot, a desperate gamble based on ancient astronomy and forgotten engineering. But it was a chance. The night of the twin moons was just 2 weeks away. Their preparations began in earnest. Under Selene's guidance, Marcus started his part of the plan. He used a loose stone from his cell floor, painstakingly sharpening its edge against the rough-hewn walls, day after day, until he had a crude but effective tool. Selene, in turn, began to work on the guards. She used her knowledge to subtly manipulate them. She'd drop hints about a hidden treasure within the dungeon walls to fuel the greed of the gambling guard, making him careless. She'd hum an old lullaby that she knew the worried father sang to his sick child, filling his thoughts with home and distracting him from his duties. She was a puppet master, pulling invisible strings from the darkness of her cell. Marcus was in awe of her intellect and her courage. She had been trapped here for years, yet her spirit was unbroken, her mind as sharp as the dagger he was slowly crafting. As the night of the twin moons approached, the tension in the dungeon became a palpable thing. Marcus could feel it in the air, in the nervous energy of the guards, in the pounding of his own heart. Everything hinged on those 17 minutes. The night arrived, cold and clear. Through the tiny crack in his cell, Marcus could see the two moons beginning their slow, majestic convergence in the sky. It was time. Now, Marcus's Selene's whisper came, sharp and clear. "Remember the pattern." 3 quick taps, a pause, then one hard strike. "Aim for the upper hinge. It's the weakest point." He took a deep breath, his hand gripping the sharpened stone. He followed her instructions, his strikes echoing unnaturally in the sudden silence of the dungeon. On the final, forceful blow, there was a loud crack, and his cell door shuddered, swinging inward just a few inches. It was enough. He slipped out, a shadow in the darkness. He moved to her cell, the lock identical to his own. He repeated the process, and with another crack, her door swung open. For the first time, he saw her. Selene was older than he'd imagined, her hair the color of silver moonlight, but her eyes. Her eyes burned with a fierce intelligence that defied her frail frame. There was no time for introductions. "The wine," she whispered, pointing upwards. "Sergeant Bourne's patrol is in 10 minutes. We must be quick." They moved like ghosts through the sleeping corridors, their bare feet making no sound on the cold stone. They found the warden's stores, and just as Selene had predicted, The rare vintage was there. They didn't take it. Instead, they carefully uncorked a cheaper bottle and, using a small, potent vial of a sleeping herb Selene had managed to cultivate from mold in her cell, they tainted the wine. They placed it conspicuously at the front of the shelf, a tempting prize for a thirsty sergeant. They then navigated the labyrinthine passages, Selene's memory their only map. They crawled through cobweb-choked vents and squeezed through forgotten service tunnels. As they neared the western wall, they heard the telltale clatter of a dropped flagon, followed by a heavy thud. Sergeant Boren had found his prize. The path was clear. They reached the old postern gate, rusted and covered in ivy. It was barred from the inside with a heavy iron beam. It would take both of their strengths to move it. As they put their shoulders to the beam, straining with every fiber of their being, the first rays of dawn were beginning to pierce the horizon. The 17 minutes were long gone. With a final, agonizing groan of metal, the beam lifted, and the gate creaked open. Freedom, the cool morning air felt intoxicating, a shock to their senses after so long in the stale dungeon. They slipped out into the misty dawn, the black citadel looming behind them like a monstrous, sleeping beast. They had done it. They had escaped. But as they looked out at the vast, unknown wilderness ahead, they knew this was not the end. It was a new, and perhaps even more dangerous beginning. Thank you for watching this part of our story. If you're captivated by Marcus and Selene's journey, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of their incredible escape. We'll see you in the next video. As the shadows of Rocca Nera grew long and twisted, a new darkness was about to fall upon the fortress. One evening, under the dim flicker of torchlight, a rider galloped through the gates, his horse slick with sweat and breathing hard. He bore a single, ominous package, a scroll sealed with the unmistakable, unbroken wax of the imperial crest. This was no ordinary message. It was a direct command from the emperor himself. The scroll was delivered into Corvinus's hands. He broke the seal with a sense of dread, the parchment crackling in the tense silence of his chambers. His eyes scanned the elegant, looping script, but the words were anything but beautiful. They were a death sentence. The order was stark, brutal, and absolute. Eliminate all prisoners by dawn. Every man, woman, and child within Rocca Nera's cells was to be executed. No exceptions, no delays. The emperor's reasoning was cold and political. A major power shift was imminent within the capital. Alliances were crumbling, and new factions were rising. The emperor feared that his rivals would use the existence of Rocca Nera's secret, a legal prison, as a weapon against him. If the stories of what happened here ever came to light, his reign could be over. So, his solution was to erase the evidence, and the evidence was the prisoners themselves. He wanted Rocca Nera wiped from history, its secrets buried with the dead before the sun could rise on a new political day. Corvinus stood frozen, the scroll clutched in his hand. This wasn't justice. This wasn't even the cruel, calculated punishment he had overseen for years. This was mass murder, a desperate act of a paranoid ruler. For the first time, the line he had always walked so carefully had vanished. On one side was his loyalty, his career, his very life. On the other, the lives of hundreds of innocent people and the last shred of his own humanity. He looked out from his window towards the silent, dark towers of the prison. He could almost hear the faint, unknowing whispers of the condemned. Dawn was only hours away. The weight of the emperor's secret order pressed down on him. Heavier than all the stone walls of Rocca Nera, he was trapped between an impossible command and an unthinkable atrocity. What would he do? The choice he made in the next few hours would not only seal the fate of the prisoners, but would define the man he was to become. The clock was ticking, and with every tick, the executioner's blade drew closer. The final grains of sand trickled through the hourglass of their lives. In the heart of the citadel, where hope had long since withered, Marcus and Selene faced their end. The executioner's axe was being sharpened, its rasping sound a grim countdown. But in the suffocating silence, a spark of defiance was about to ignite. Marcus, his body a canvas of bruises, but his spirit unbroken, looked at Selene. Her eyes, usually a storm of calculation, now held a desperate fire. There was no grand strategy left, no intricate plan to dismantle the regime from within. There was only survival. With just hours left, they decided to bet everything on a single, desperate gamble. They began to move through the gloom of the dungeons, their whispers cutting through the resigned quiet. They approached the other prisoners, men and women who had long ago surrendered to their fate. To the grizzled old soldier with a broken sword arm, Marcus spoke of one last battle, a fight not for a king or a country, but for the right to see another sunrise. To the young thief who could slip through shadows like smoke, Selene described a freedom beyond any treasure she'd ever stolen. They weren't offering a promise of victory. They were offering a chance to die on their feet rather than on their knees. At first, there was doubt. Eyes that had been hollow for years looked back at them with suspicion. Why now? What could two condemned prisoners possibly do? But as Marcus's voice grew stronger, filled with the conviction of a man with nothing left to lose, and as Selene's quiet intensity painted a vivid picture of escape, something shifted. A flicker of the old fire returned to those deadened eyes. The soldier's hand clenched into a fist. The thief's gaze sharpened. A handful of others, drawn by the magnetic pull of this insane hope, gathered around. It wasn't an army, but it was a start. The silence of the dungeons had been broken, replaced by the hushed, urgent murmur of revolt. The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. The citadel was a fortress, impenetrable and crawling with guards. A direct assault was out of the question. Their only hope lay in something Selene had discovered during her long, sleepless nights of confinement. While pacing her cell, tracing the cold stones with her fingers, she had noticed something odd. A section of the wall where the mortar was different, newer. Prying at it with a piece of loose metal, she had unearthed not just loose stones, but a hidden history. The citadel, she realized, was built upon the ruins of a much older city, a city with its own secrets. Behind the crumbling facade was not solid earth, but a dark, narrow passage. It was a forgotten maintenance tunnel, barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through. For weeks, she had explored these hidden veins of the fortress in secret, mapping them in her mind. Most led to dead ends or collapsed sections. But one, she believed, was their salvation. It was a path that snaked deep into the foundations of the citadel, a secret known only to the ghosts of the past. This was the key she presented to their small, desperate band. The guards expected an attack on the gates, a futile, noisy riot. They would never expect the prisoners to simply vanish. The passage Selene had found was their ace in the hole. It was choked with dust and cobwebs, a claustrophobic crawl into the unknown. But it was a path the guards didn't know existed. The plan was set. They would create a diversion, a loud, chaotic uprising in the main cell block to draw the attention of every guard. While the Citadel's forces were occupied with quelling the riot, Marcus, Selene, and their chosen few would slip away into the hidden passage, disappearing into the guts of the fortress itself. It was a race against time. The diversion had to be convincing enough and last long enough for them to make their escape. If it failed, they would all be slaughtered. The moment arrived, a signal was passed, a shared look of grim understanding. Then, chaos erupted. A prisoner threw his tin plate against the bars, the clang echoing like a war drum. Another let out a defiant roar. Soon, the entire cell block was a symphony of rebellion. Shouts, banging, rattling chains, the noise was deafening, a raw, primal scream for freedom. Guards, caught completely by surprise, swarmed the area, their shouts for order lost in the pandemonium. This was the window. As the main force of the garrison converged on the riot, Marcus wrenched the loose stone from the wall of his cell. A gust of stale, ancient air washed over them. One by one, their small group of escapees slipped into the darkness. Selene went first, her knowledge of the tunnels their only guide. Marcus followed, bringing up the rear, his presence a reassurance to the frightened faces behind him. He took one last look back at the chaos, at the brave souls who were buying them time with their lives, and then plunged into the suffocating blackness of the passage. The tunnel was even worse than Selene had described. It was a tight, suffocating crawl space that scraped at their skin and filled their lungs with dust. The air was thick and heavy, smelling of damp earth and decay. They moved in single file, the only sound their own ragged breathing and the scuttling of unseen things in the dark. Fear was a physical presence wrapping around them, threatening to choke the hope from their hearts. Every scrape of a boot, every dislodged pebble sounded like a thunderclap, sure to bring the entire Citadel Guard down upon them. But Selene led them on with an unerring sense of direction, her hand tracing the cool, damp walls, navigating the labyrinthine twists and turns from memory. They were no longer prisoners in a cell, but explorers in a lost world buried beneath their prison. Time lost all meaning in the oppressive darkness. It could have been minutes or hours. They just kept moving, driven by the primal need to survive. Just as their hope began to fray, the tunnel opened into a larger space. A vast, cavernous chamber stretched out before them, its ceiling lost in the gloom. And in the center, they heard it, the sound of running water. Selene had been right. Her hidden passages had led them to an ancient, underground aqueduct. A massive stone-lined channel carved through the bedrock, carrying a swift, dark river deep beneath the city. This was the final leg of their journey. The water was their escape route, a current that could carry them far beyond the Citadel's walls, out into the wilderness. But it was also a terrifying prospect. The water was black, cold, and fast. No one knew where it led or what dangers lurked in its depths. Stepping into that current was a leap of faith, a final surrender to the unknown. There was no time to hesitate. Above them, they could hear the muffled sounds of the riot dying down. Soon, the guards would realize they were gone. Marcus looked at the small, terrified group. He saw the doubt in their eyes, the primal fear of the dark water. He stepped forward, his voice calm and steady. He told them that fear was a cage, just like the one they had left behind. Freedom, true freedom, was on the other side of that fear. He wouldn't ask them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. With that, he turned and, without a moment's hesitation, stepped off the ledge into the rushing black water. The shock of the cold was breathtaking, the current immediately seizing him, pulling him under. For a heart-stopping moment, he disappeared. Then, his head broke the surface downstream, and he let out a triumphant shout that echoed through the cavern. One by one, inspired by his courage, the others followed. Selene was the last to go. She paused on the edge, looking back into the darkness of the tunnels, a silent farewell to the prison that had almost claimed her. Then, she too leaped into the river, embracing the unknown. The currents swept them away, carrying them from the heart of the citadel into the dark. Watery veins of the earth, away from their executioners and towards an uncertain dawn. Their desperate plan had worked. They were free, but their journey was far from over. They had escaped the citadel, but they were now adrift in a world that wanted them dead, with only each other to rely on. The revolt was over, but their rebellion had just begun. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for the next part of the story. The flickering torches cast long, dancing shadows against the cold, damp stone of the tunnels. A desperate escape, a flight from a fate worse than death itself. We plunged into the darkness, the roar of Corvinus's rage echoing behind us, a promise of retribution we couldn't afford to face. His elite guards, the very instruments of his tyranny. were on our heels, their heavy footsteps a drumbeat of impending doom. The air was thick with the scent of stagnant water and fear. Water, cold and biting, surged around our ankles, threatening to pull us down into the watery abyss with every step. It was a treacherous race against time, a mad dash through a labyrinth designed to swallow its victims whole. The chaos was a living, breathing entity in those narrow corridors. The shouts of the other escapees, the clang of metal on stone, the splash of panicked feet, all blended into a symphony of desperation. My torch sputtered, its flame a fragile beacon in the overwhelming dark. Every flicker threatened to plunge us into absolute blackness, leaving us blind and at the mercy of the labyrinth and our pursuers. The walls seemed to close in, the ceiling pressing down, and the weight of the mountain above felt like it could crush us at any moment. You could feel the sheer panic in the air, a palpable force that threatened to break even the strongest will. Amidst this maelstrom, my focus narrowed to a single point: Selene. She was right beside me, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fierce determination. I had to protect her. That one thought burned brighter than my failing torch. Every decision, every turn, was weighed against her safety. The guards were relentless, their movements swift and precise. They knew these tunnels, every twist and turn, while we were just rats in a maze, running on pure instinct. I parried a blow from a guard who seemed to materialize from the shadows, the shock of the impact vibrating up my arm. I pushed Selene ahead, shouting for her to keep moving, to not look back. The water was rising, no longer just at our ankles but now swirling around our knees, its current growing stronger, threatening to sweep us off our feet. The cries of those who stumbled and were lost to the dark waters were a horrifying reminder of the stakes. One wrong turn, one moment of hesitation, could mean drowning in this subterranean river or being dragged back to the gilded cage we had just escaped. The choice was stark: a watery grave or the slow, agonizing death Corvinus had planned for us. I fought with a savagery born of desperation, my movements fueled by adrenaline and the primal need to protect the one person who mattered. We pushed deeper, the sounds of our pursuers growing fainter, but the danger was far from over. The tunnel split, two dark mouths gaping before us. Which way? Left or right? It was a coin toss with our lives on the line. I grabbed Selene's hand, her skin cold against mine, and pulled her down the right-hand path, a gut decision based on nothing but a sliver of hope. The water seemed to flow faster here, pulling us along. Was it leading us to freedom or to a dead end, a watery trap? We had no way of knowing. We could only keep moving forward, our hearts pounding in our chests, the echoes of the fight fading into the gurgle of the current. The air began to change. A faint, almost imperceptible breeze touched my face, carrying a scent that wasn't the stale, musty odor of the tunnels. It smelled of wet earth, of night, of freedom. Hope, a dangerous and fragile thing, flickered to life within me. Could it be an exit? We scrambled faster, our tired limbs finding a new reserve of strength. The tunnel began to slope upwards, and the water level receded, first to our knees, then our ankles, until we were running on damp, solid ground. The darkness ahead seemed less absolute, a deep, inky blue rather than the pitch black we had grown accustomed to. A pinprick of light appeared, a star in our subterranean night. We burst out of the tunnel and into the cold night air, gasping, stumbling onto a rocky ledge overlooking a dense forest. The moon was a silver disk in the sky, illuminating the world in shades of gray and white. We were out, we were free, but the relief was short-lived. A chilling howl echoed from the tunnel entrance behind us. They hadn't given up. The hunt was still on. We were no longer prisoners, but we were fugitives, and our journey had only just begun. The relative safety of the forest beckoned, a sanctuary of shadows where we might just have a chance to disappear. We exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between us. This was far from over. We scrambled down the rocky outcrop, the forest floor a welcome cushion beneath our exhausted feet. The canopy of ancient trees swallowed the moonlight, plunging us back into a familiar, comforting darkness. This was our element now, the shadows our only allies. The sounds of pursuit were distant, but persistent. Corvinus would not let us go easily. He had been humiliated, his authority challenged, and he would scour the earth to reclaim what he considered his property. We were marked, hunted, and alone, but we were together. And as we melted into the sprawling wilderness, a new resolve hardened within me. We would not just survive. We would fight back. We would make him regret the day he ever underestimated us. The game had changed, and we were no longer the pawns. The blood shed in those tunnels was not an end, but a beginning. It was the price of our freedom, and we would make sure it was a price worth paying. For now, we run, we hide, and we plan. Because the night is long, and our war is just getting started. Thank you so much for joining me on this chapter of the story. It's an intense ride, and it's only going to get more thrilling from here. What do you think will happen to Marcus and Selene out in the wild? Let me know your theories down in the comments. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Your support means the world and allows me to keep creating this content for you. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. The first rays of dawn sliced through the morning mist, painting the horizon in shades of gray and rose. We had made it. Miles from the suffocating stone of Rocca Nera, we stumbled through the wilderness, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Each step was a testament to our survival, a defiant push against the death that had stalked us through the fortress's shadowed halls. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed, but a desperate, wild energy propelled me forward. We were alive. That single thought was a drumbeat in my chest, a rhythm that drowned out the pain. Selene walked beside me, her face pale and etched with exhaustion, but her eyes held a fierce light I hadn't seen before. The horrors we had witnessed had not broken her. They had forged her into something new, something sharper. We didn't speak. Words felt too small, too hollow to contain the magnitude of what we had endured. The shared silence was a language of its own, a bond sealed in blood and terror. We had walked into Rocca Nera as strangers, bound by duty and circumstance. We were leaving as something more, survivors entwined by a secret too terrible to bear alone. A sudden, earth-shaking roar ripped through the quiet morning. We spun around, our hearts leaping into our throats. On the distant horizon, where the jagged silhouette of Rocca Nera clawed at the sky, a pillar of fire and black smoke billowed upwards. The fortress was burning. Flames licked at its stone towers, devouring the secrets held within its walls. A gut-wrenching understanding washed over me. Corvinus, he was following his orders to the bitter end, eradicating every trace of the nightmare we had uncovered. The Emperor's command: destroy the evidence. And so, the fortress, with all its unspeakable history, was being consumed by a purifying fire. We stood there, transfixed, watching the inferno rage against the dawn. The smoke was a funeral pyre for the damned souls trapped within those walls, a final screaming testament to their agony. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction, a sense of justice in its destruction. Let it burn. Let the ashes be scattered to the winds, so no one would ever have to suffer there again. But another part of me felt a cold dread creeping in. The fire wasn't just destroying a fortress, it was erasing the truth. Corvinus was burying the evidence so deep that no one would ever be able to prove what had happened. Selene's hand found mine, her grip tight and grounding. I looked at her, and in her eyes, I saw my own fear reflected back at me. We were the only ones left, the only living proof. We carried the truth within us, a heavy, dangerous burden. The fire that consumed Rocca Nera had also branded us. It was a signal to the empire that the loose ends were being tied up, and we were the last frayed threads. As the sun climbed higher, casting the burning fortress into stark relief, the reality of our situation settled upon us like a shroud. We were alive, yes. We were free from the immediate clutches of that hell, yes. But we were not safe. We were fugitives. We had seen what the highest echelons of the empire wanted to keep hidden. We knew the depravity that festered beneath the gilded surface of its power, and for that knowledge, we would be hunted. The emperor's reach was long, his memory unforgiving. He would not tolerate witnesses. The smoke continued to rise, a dark stain against the morning sky, a constant reminder of the past we couldn't escape and the future that now hunted us. We had survived Rocca Nera, but a new trial had just begun. Every shadow could hold an assassin. Every friendly face could be a spy. The entire empire was now our prison, a vast and dangerous landscape we had to navigate. Looking back one last time at the plume of smoke, I felt a strange mix of terror and resolve. They thought they could erase the truth with fire. They were wrong. The truth wasn't in the stones of that fortress. 'Twas in our memories, seared into our souls. They could hunt us, they could try to silence us, but we would not be easily erased. We were the living evidence. And as long as we breathed, the secret of Rocca Nera would survive. We turned away from the burning horizon and faced the unknown wilderness ahead. The path was uncertain, fraught with peril, but we would walk it together. We had escaped the fire, only to find ourselves in the frying pan. Our journey was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. The empire had made us enemies. It would soon learn what a grave mistake that was. Our fight for survival was now a fight for the truth. Thank you for watching this chapter of our story unfold. The road ahead is long and dangerous for Marcus and Selene, and their journey is one we'll be following closely. If you're as invested as I am, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you do unmiss what happens next. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think they should do. Until next time, stay safe and keep seeking the truth.